Writers right wrongs. If an idea or a story I'm writing speaks to something I'm angered at in the world, it becomes medicinal for like my soul to, at least in a made-up world, to figure out a way to fix that thing. The things in my gut want to say no to become the things that I'm most passionate writing about.
This is the Act One podcast. I'm your host, James Duke. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy our podcast, don't forget to subscribe and write us a good review. My guest today is comic book writer Jim Krueger. Jim is an American comic book writer, novelist, and filmmaker. He's a bit of a legend in the comic book world. He's considered one of the top-rated writers currently working in American comics today. In addition to creating his own comic properties, his projects include the prestigious X trilogy from Marvel Comics and Justice from DC Comics. Jim is a great storyteller, and he tells several great stories on our podcast today. And just so I don't get any complaints, because I didn't warn you, there is some use of flowery language and wordy dirds, so be sure to listen to this episode with your earbuds in if your kids are around. Enjoy. Jim Krueger, welcome, man. It's good to see you.
Hey, thanks. So happy to be here. And by here, I mean like at home in my apartment where I've been for the last year and a half. Sorry.
Yes. To be able to interact with other humans is a wonderful thing in this day and age. I always enjoy spending time with you. I feel like every time I come away from our conversations, I feel a little bit smarter, a little bit more clever, and have enjoyed life a little bit more every time I spend time with you. So thanks for joining me today.
Oh my God, that's such high praise.
It's a big, now you have a lot to live up to now. So
I know. Well, just a little to live up to.
Jim, I want to talk to you about kind of a wide array of topics today, and but first off, I'd love for people just to know your love and passion. One of the things I love about you is your love and passion for film and story. That's something that you just there's a couple of friends that I have that, and you're one of them who. And we have a mutual friend, Scott Reynolds, who I've interviewed on this podcast too. And you guys just have such a deep love for film. And where does that come from for you? For you, where does this passion and love for film come from?
I don't know if it's just nostalgia, and it's not just film. It's definitely story overall. I mean, my dad got me into comic books at a really young age, and I grew up in probably one of the most cloistered Disney families you could possibly imagine. Like every Sunday night was watching The Wonderful World of Disney.
Yeah.
Reheated frozen pizza, and it was the one night of the week I was allowed to have soda. And, it was like there are all these warm memories of story and family coming together around story. So it starts there, but then I think there was a point early on in college, even though I was already making up stories, even though I was already, I was building on my imagination. There was a point in college where I started reading Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, almost at the very beginning, and this was before he did Watchmen and became famous for that, and all that kind of thing. Where I saw I saw something he was doing where I looked at it and I said, I could do that. Not the way Alan Moore does it, because I mean he's so amazing, but it was like, I could do that. So my appreciation for story wasn't just from the outside looking in. It was like, oh, I want to be a part of this. And I would already see movies that other friends hated.
Yeah.
And because of the ending of the movies. And I was like, well, if you did this, that ending would work then, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And I'll be like, oh yeah. Oh, wow. Jim, you should have done that. And then bit by bit, like almost accidental stumble, I found myself in the process of becoming a storyteller. But it wasn't like this great ambition at all, because I didn't, and it could have been, but I never even dreamed that I could get to do any of this. I never hoped that I could get to do any of this.
Is Alan Moore, would you consider him your greatest influence, or who are some of the some of your greatest influences?
Well, on the comic side, I would say, the big three of comic book writers are probably Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, and Frank Miller. Those are the three that really, I read and I reread and I reread. Neil Gaiman's one of those big names and stuff like that. But I love his short stories, his prose short stories, probably more than anything. Like, there's just something about his short stories. And this all gets to do, this all moves into film. Like, I was a giant fan of the Evil Dead stuff that Sam Raimi did years ago. And so as soon as I started having comic books that I was writing, I was sending them to Sam, not because I thought anything would come of it, but just because it was fun to think that I was sharing my stories with Sam Raimi. So I would send him comics, and that led to a couple of really nice meetings with him that were just amazing, that we can talk about later. But I want to say that, my story of getting into story is so like one toe at a time. I was like the wimpiest person getting into the hot tub imaginable.
Why do you say that? Why?
Probably part of it was self-esteem. Part of it was probably this Midwestern sense of ethics that I had of like, oh, don't push, don't, blah, blah, blah. Everyone's got a story to tell. And, it was, my great, my great problem, I guess, is politeness.
Is it where you have such an appreciation for great story that a part of you thought, I can't be in the same water. Like, I can't imagine myself. So why would I even try to be in the same water?
That's where I am now. At the beginning, it was just like, oh, maybe I can do it. What if I try this? Oh, blah, blah, blah. And now it's like, oh my gosh, how can I even go up against this? These people are taking meetings with me. What?
I find it fascinating that you have that perception kind of early on. What kind of pushed you into, I'm going to do this? What led to you saying, I actually want to make a career out of this? I don't want it to just be, a hobby or a passing interest. I actually want to try to get someone to pay me to do this.
Well, two things. One, when I started reading Alan Moore, I was also going to school for advertising. I was going to be a copywriter. And yet I wasn't a very good salesperson, at least not at that point, where I was looking at myself and saying, oh, I know how to speak to people. I know how to engage in a way that I see where I have something that would be of interest to them or helpful to them, no matter what client I was representing in advertising or not. Like, I just did it because I thought, oh, I've always been good at puns, so I guess I can do that in advertising. Like that was the whole reason for getting into it. It was ridiculous.
You were just going to spend the rest of your life writing puns for Volvo ads. That's what you were going to do.
Right. Well, I am proud of some of the ads I wrote when I worked for the Sheboygan fishing tournament, Coho fishing tournament.
That's amazing.
It's a really conservative, and it won awards. My campaigns won awards, which were amazing. It was my first job out of college. It only lasted 6 months, but like, people going into Sheboygan, and it's a conservative city. And by conservative, I'm not talking politically. I'm just like,
right.
It's a happy little town on one of the Great Lakes, and but people coming into town would see these giant billboards that would say "Keep your fly open for 3 days in August." There was a newspaper ad that opened up that said "Hang out with the local hookers," and it was all type. It was all really fun.
Because if it's about fishing in Sheboygan, listen, if I don't get a movie script out of you about something that takes place at the Sheboygan fishing tournament, I'm going to be profoundly disappointed. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. They even have this. This boat thing they do every year for their tournament, in which um, all the businesses in the area build their own cardboard boats, and most of the boats never make it off the dock. And so because I was just good at puns, that was all I could really do. I was put in charge of, I was company mascot, almost put in charge of things. So I was put in charge of our boat, and we did it, and we only got halfway, and we're taking on water. And I said, okay, there's only one thing to do. So we all stood up in our boat and saluted the people on the shore as our boat collapsed and sunk. And we won most spectacular sinking in there.
I've heard of that competition. I've actually seen somebody else do that. I mean, not in Sheboygan, but
That would be such a great documentary.
it would be actually. No,
We're going to follow this team as they build their boat, and they can only use
cardboard.
duct tape and cardboard.
So how did you transition to?
Because I was reading comics at this point, I started, in addition to doing puns and stuff like that, I started writing scripts, and I would take them into my local comic shop, which was Capital City Comics. And they had a location in Madison and one in Milwaukee. And I would just make copies of my scripts and give them to those guys to read. And they ended up liking them. And they would be like, what are the next scripts? And they would tell me new comics I should read. And they were like, we think you write like this guy, you should read this. And it was just this really organic, it was like a hobby. It was just a fun hobby thing. And then when my 6-month job at that Sheboygan agency ended, or sunk, majestically, just like our boat, I took another job writing advertising in Madison, Wisconsin. And then in Madison, Wisconsin, it was like another 6-month thing. I was a junior copywriter. Those jobs don't last long because they're so based on how well the business is doing. And this was advertising in Wisconsin. Anyhow, one night there was a knock at my apartment door, and 3 guys pushed their way into my apartment with guns, wanting me to give them the drugs and money that they mistakenly thought I had for them. Have I told you the story?
Yes, you've told me a version of it. Keep going. I want everyone to hear it.
So anyhow, I had heard stories of people not being trapped in their cars with people, not being trapped in their homes with people. So as the 3 pushed their way into my apartment, I pushed my way past them out into the hallway. So now they were inside with me, or they were on the inside and I was on the outside. So 2 of the 3 guys came out, and one guy was like, "What's your name?" Well, the first thing they said is I was like, "Look, I don't have any." I explained. I said, "I don't have any money. I don't have drugs. I just moved into this place." I said, "There's a stereo there. You could take that. It was a wedding gift, but it turned out not to be such a good marriage." So, I mean, even though stuff like that seems really funny now, I'm like, that's what I said.
You said that to him?
Oh yeah, it's even crazier than that. And so they were like, that's not what they wanted. They wanted the money and the cash. So the 2 guys are out in the hallway with me, and I'm thinking, because the hallway is near the main door that comes in, maybe someone would come in and that would change things, but no one was coming in. And so the one guy goes, What's your name? I said, it's Jim. He goes, no, it's not. It's Bill. I said, it's Jim. There's ID maybe in my wallet in the bedroom there. Maybe there's 20 or 40 bucks in there. If, I know you probably want more money, but that's all that you're going to find in there. And they're like, go and get it for us. And I said, I told you I'm not going to go in the apartment with you. And so he's getting frustrated. He looks at the third guy and comes back to me and says, well, you better do what we say because he has a gun. And I said, well, let me see it. And so the guy pulls out a semi-automatic.
Oh my gosh.
And he's got the semi-automatic on me. And the second guy goes into the apartment and, I like my mind goes into some sort of black hole. Time means nothing. And this whole soliloquy emerges before me. My first thought is of my soon-to-be ex-wife who said that she was praying to God that I would die in a car accident. And I was like, he's answering her prayer. What kind of God would do that? And then I started thinking about my mom and all the religious movies she would watch and Quo Vadis and all the happy Christians going into the pits to be, and singing while the lions devour them. And I'm like, oh my God. This is it. I can't believe it. And I was like, all right. And so I looked at the guy and I said, look, I'm so afraid you're going to shoot me. I'm going to die. So before you do that, God loves you. And the guy must have been haunted by the ghost of his grandmother at that point because he was like, oh, shit. And he ran down the hallway and out that front door, gun and all.
Wow.
And then the other two guys were in my apartment still. So I start going down the hall and pounding on neighbors' doors. And then finally a guy lets me into his apartment and I call the cops and stuff like that. And there are two ironies to this story. The first is that guy's name was Bill.
The guy who let you into his apartment, his name was Bill.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
So the second irony was that the guys did take one thing while they were in my apartment. That was my briefcase. And later on that night, maybe 2 or 3 hours later, I get a call from someone like 20 miles away telling me that they had found my briefcase in the middle of like this country road, because it's Madison, Wisconsin. And it had been jimmied open. Sorry to use that phrase. It had been jimmied open. And they found my my business cards in there and stuff like that. But these guys who opened it up looking for drugs and money, what they would have found is all my sketches and all my ideas for stories that had been part of this hobby and all that kind of thing. And I was like, it had all been returned to me. Some of those ideas I'm still turning into things now. And
Wow.
So, dealing with superheroes as much as I do, I look at this as kind of this secret origin night in which, growing up as cloistered as I did, I still found myself in a bad marriage. I still found myself with death at my door. But there was this new greatness that had come upon that night, and this great sense of irony and this great sense of, I thought my life was over, but what was restored was like even my ideas and a courage to step out that had never been there before. So
Wow.
a lucky thing.
Wow. That's something else. There's so much in there. Clearly one of my favorite moments is you thinking you're probably going to die. And so you just think to yourself, well, I better just get this out there to the guy who's going to shoot me dead. God loves you. And the guy takes off running.
So there was a sense in which I was given this almost cosmic calling to do something.
Yeah.
And pretty much so a week from then, together with this awesome art director I had done some of the Sheboygan ads with, I put together a bunch of mailers for myself, like these cards that would almost be like ads, where they would make a statement on the cover and then open up and then have like the punchline or whatever, all for my writing, and started sending them to Marvel to get a job at Marvel writing advertising for them. And it was like 3 months later, and I was living in New York working at Marvel.
Wow. That's amazing. It's such a great story, Jim. There's a lot there. Do, when you um when you got to Marvel, did you think to yourself, I'm here, I've landed, I'm just going to be happy, and or were you already thinking, man, I want to eventually get a shot at writing some of these characters?
Um, well, I was really excited to be working there, but again, I just didn't even think that I would get that opportunity. It was more like every once in a while, like I would write a campaign for Spider-Man, and what was going on at Marvel is Marvel at the time had just lost all the image artists, or all the artists like Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee, because they had gone to start Image, and Marvel's books weren't selling as well, and so like marketing and advertising was being so mean to editorial and threatening them and stuff like that. So here I come in, with my Wisconsin zippity doodah attitude, and they're like, they would be like, "How are you?" And I'd say, "Thanks for asking," and they'd be like, "What's wrong with this person?" I was clear. It was clearly, I was clearly a transplant into this environment, but I would write campaigns that were like great campaigns. I mean, Advertising Age was writing us up. We were getting all kinds of notice, and like campaigns we had never even that had like we were using real advertising things to just telling stories or house for making house ads at Marvel. We were doing campaigns and all this stuff, and Marvel had never seen that before, and it just became this thing. But again, there was so much animosity between editorial and that it was like there just wasn't that much opportunity to step in. But every once in a while, there'd be an editor that I would befriend, or there'd be someone who was excited, and it was just like, it was like where there was a crack, there'd be an opportunity to do something.
What was your first published comic book?
It was a backup story in Excalibur 75. And they were so nice to let me pick my artist. And so I grabbed this artist named Tim Sale.
Wow.
And that was his first work for Marvel. And we did a Nightcrawler story. We did a Nightcrawler story about Nightcrawler, because they always established that Nightcrawler was Catholic. And while I'm not Catholic, I think I would have made an awesome lapsed one, given the opportunity and the proper childhood. Anyhow, it was a story where there's a fire and Nightcrawler teleports into the fire to save a woman, and then she sees him appear in the midst of the flames, and she thinks she's gone to hell, and it makes rescuing her all the worse. And so he ends up going to a confessional where, while he's in the confessional, he confesses to being a mutant and has to deal with then the racism and bigotry of the priest. But what's so interesting is it ends with the priest confessing himself and admitting that we all have our crosses to bear, as we see Nightcrawler's X-Men insignia, and then that got used at the end of the Wolverine movie, Logan.
Oh,
yeah. So that's cool.
That's very
fun.
Cool.
So it was like the first time that had been used as a way to, compare the two imageries.
Yeah. Obviously you're known to comic book fans all over for a lot of your work, but Earth X is something that has had a real lasting impact? What was the maybe talk a little bit about, you know, how did that project come about? Excuse me. How did that project come about, and what was it like writing such a story at that scale with all of these characters that you had read over the years? What must have that have been like?
Well, what's interesting is when I first started at Marvel, one of the things that my department did was we were also in charge of going to comic book conventions and meeting with people and talking with people and promoting at the conventions. And so one of the very first jobs I had talking was promoting a new project Marvel had coming out called Marvels with an artist named Alex Ross, who at that point no one even knew about. And so Alex and I got to hang out in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at a convention called Gen Con. And it was my job to take him and his art around and show it off to people and kind of befriend him. And while we were there, we talked about our love for Jack Kirby and Machine Man and all this sort of thing. And we became instant friends. And, in that friendship grew over the years. When he was working on Kingdom Come, just coming up with the original ideas for the story and stuff like that, we would talk about Kingdom Come and different ideas and all that kind of thing. And he, so we knew each other. And then I was doing Marvel, always trying to find new ways to make money and new ways to deal with things. They were spending all this money advertising in this fan magazine called Wizard Magazine. And Marvel was looking for a way to save on all that advertising dollars. So they decided they were going to make their own fan magazine called Marvel Vision. And so, and they needed, like extra like things in it. So one of the things that was in Marvel Vision that I wrote every month is that we would hire an artist to redraw one of the original characters, whether Fantastic Four or Spider-Man or Silver Surfer, whatever, from a perspective like a brand new artist or a hot artist of the day, but doing it in a way as if they had never seen what Jack Kirby did or Steve Ditko. Like the discipline was like, you can't think of what they did. You have to redefine this in a brand new way. And because those images were so interesting, I would write an alternate origin to them. And so like Jeff Smith, who's famous for Bone, this kind of kids all ages fantasy project. He did the Silver Surfer, and Alex liked my origin so much. He was like, that's what the origin of the Silver Surfer really should be. Oh my gosh. And then he became like a real fan of this. And every time a new issue would come out, he would read that. He would want to read it. I would start sending him the origins that I wrote earlier. And it was just like a paragraph or two, but it would always be a little irony, a little, this and that. And then Wizard approached Alex after Kingdom Come had come out and said, well, how would you show the Marvel heroes older? So Alex came up with, 10, 12 sketches of, 12 of the classic Marvel heroes, what they would look like and stuff like that. And he said, Jim, why don't you write? Why don't you do what you do for Marvel Vision for this? And I wrote it, and, and then Alex was really happy. They had to pass him before Marvel. And then the president of Marvel at the time responded and said, okay, this is a real project, done.
Wow.
It was just like that. And I know I used the F word earlier, which you can, like, maybe we're saving that up. But what one story for the other story you wanted me to tell, but I know that one of the real things I remember is, you think, oh my gosh, I've got this giant project. That's it. I'm set. I'll never have to look for jobs after this. They'll just come to me and stuff like that. Well, there was still that animosity with editorial. I remember walking by someone's office and they didn't know I was outside their office, but I heard them get the call that I was going to be writing this big project that Alex Ross was involved in. And I just heard them in their office go, "Fuck Jim Krueger." And it was like,
You after that, you knew you had arrived. Just kidding.
no. It was more like, oh, why couldn't it just have been "fuck Jim Krueger"? Why couldn't it have been like that?
Oh, that's funny, Jim. That's funny.
But it's like success brings its own, there's the own other side of it and stuff like that. But I got to write it, and what was really fortunate for Earth X, because it explains so many of the MacGuffins of the Marvel universe, and is not only the first attempt, but still kind of the only attempt to create on the comic side. I mean, the cinematic universe is certainly doing this, but it's almost maybe the only attempt to tie together the continuity of 30, 40 years of unexplained MacGuffins and history and all that sort of thing in a way that really took the 60s to the 80s and made it all work together. And so, because Marvel was going through all kinds of restructuring, and because they had all kinds of financial problems at the time and were in whatever form of bankruptcy they were, the fact that we were selling meant that no one paid any attention to what we were doing.
Nice.
So we were in the top 10 comics, every single issue of Earth X. And, even when questions arose through editorial, even the editor-in-chief was like, well, it's working, so let's not touch it. It's one of our only things that's working right now.
I have a question. This is a kind of a side question, but I've always wanted to ask you this, which is, and just anyone who who writes comics at the level that you do, do you actually have a preference as to how you want people to experience your comic book? Do you want them to experience them as single issues and have to wait weekly, or are you perfectly fine with them reading it as a collected graphic novel? I because I mean, obviously you can do either one, but I'm just curious, given the fact that you grew up reading single issues, and that's you fell in love with comics that way. Do you have a preference for how you want your audience to experience it?
I don't think I do anymore. Like it's really interesting when you consider things like Netflix and binging and how we even watch TV shows now. We're not a people anymore who wait for things.
Exactly. Yeah.
And yet there was like even, before a comic book comes out now, a single issue, you've seen synopsises of what's going to happen, and you've seen the cover and all the alternate covers, and that gives you hints of what's coming in. Like, I remember the days in which I would either be at a spinner rack in a drugstore or go into a comic shop, and the first time I would see a cover for an issue would be that day. And there was something so exciting about that, and being like, oh my God, look at that. Oh, I have to have this.
Yeah.
As opposed to, oh, I'm going to get this because I read this. Or, oh, that's that cover I saw. Or like there was a sense of reveal that was more shocking then and more exciting then. And sometimes when there would be, when there would be like a cliffhanger at the end, or some, like, it looks like your hero got shot, or the world exploded, or whatever like that, you'd be like, 30 days? I have to wait 30 days to find out?
Right. Yes.
And there's an excitement about that.
Yes.
There was definitely an excitement about that. But but that was also when there was only 1 or 2 Spider-Man books out there.
Right.
Now when there are 6 or 7 or 8 Spider-Man books out there, chances are Spider-Man really didn't get shot.
Yeah. I have become less a fan of binging than I think when I first, when Netflix first came out and that became a thing. I think there are certain shows that lend themselves to it for sure.
Oh, me
But
too.
but I also think that, watching The Mandalorian with my kids and waiting every Friday was fun. Right?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's Sunday night pizza and soda.
Yes, that's exactly right. What that nostalgia you were talking about, it made it special again. But I also just binged um, Yellowstone, the Kevin Costner show, and I just got through the whole thing and really liked it. And but
Yeah,
at the same,
I binged Cobra Kai, and that was so binge worthy.
yes, I did too. So good, right? So I go back and forth. Maybe it depends on the show, but then I remember binging the last season of Stranger Things, and at the end, when I should be, happy and content, like I was when I binged the last season of Cobra Kai, I was sad because I literally had the thought, I'm not going to be able to revisit these characters again for another 3 to 4 years at this point. And so I struggle with that. I go back and forth. I tend to think and shows like Game of Thrones would never have reached their level of popularity if they had reached if HBO let you watch all of them at the same time. There really is something about those kind of shows like The Mandalorian where the more you're able to talk about them with your friends,
Right.
it builds up this level of excitement, and for sure. And
I wonder if we're going to get to a point where things get released 3 episodes at a time, and there's going to be a staggered kind of thing, because I have to imagine marketers and different people are looking at that and they're saying, okay, how can we appeal to the binging crowd while at the same time allowing this to grow beyond what it would if you can just watch it in a weekend?
yeah, I mean, and other people have tried different things, right? Like AMC would release Walking Dead in chunks, so they started doing part 1 of a season and then part 2 of a season, so you'd get like
Yeah.
6 episodes and then 6 episodes 3 months later. And so I think different people have tried different things, and WandaVision just came out in 2 episodes because they're half hour. So, but yeah, I mean, some people, I think probably that's the way they only want to experience stuff. And it's good that we have those options, but I just thought it was just curious about how you would want, your I enjoy experiencing comic books in graphic novel form. I like to read the completed story. I think it would drive me nuts if I had to wait 30 days to find out what happened.
Well, and I think like when you look at something like Earth X, there is something exciting reading it all together as one whole story, because it's like that's a really complex story.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even necessarily, it was like a special project. So it's not like a monthly book where every month you get an ongoing chapter moving it forward the way TV is. It's meant to sit on its own.
Yeah. And I'm also a little lazy. I like the publisher. I like the publisher does the work for me and collects whatever I need to read and all the additional tie-in. It's like I don't really need to read that tie-in book. I can just read this tie-in book because you're telling me that's the one that's the most important. So you've done a follow-up to Earth X with Alex
Ross, yeah.
Alex Ross, and of course, my first introduction to you before we even met in person was Justice, and I remember, as a matter of fact, some of our mutual friends. I distinctly remember. I think it was like maybe Brian Belknap, Nathan Scoggins, or someone. They said your name to me. They were with you at some event, and I said Jim Krueger, and they said yeah. And I no joke, Jim. I was on the phone with him, and I literally look right up, excuse me, at the bookshelf like above my desk, and Justice is right there, and I went, the comic book Jim Krueger, and they said yeah, I think so, and I was like, no, wait, I'm looking at one of his books right now, And so Justice was, I had read it and was a fan of it even before I even met you. But my point to all this is your work with Alex Ross. I think people would be curious to know. He's such a legend in and of himself, and I the creative process when you work with him. What is that like? I would think people would really like to know how do you two work together in creating these projects? Is it how collaborative is it in nature? Do you, and what is that like? Do you guys just sit down and do like hour-long sessions where you just bust everything out and then go back and forth on things, or is there an outline created? I'm just curious about your creative process with Alex.
Yeah, I'll back up just a second to talk about something an agent told me years ago. An agent told me years ago, I think I was telling them, because how I started getting involved in all the movie stuff was through foot soldiers, because I met a guy in the back of a bus going from Manhattan to Montclair who turned out to be the executive producer of all the Batman movies. And he optioned one of my comic book projects. And then because they didn't want to pay the renewal of the option, he trained me for the next year in exchange for the year's option to write screenplays. So that
Wow.
origin is part of it. It's another one of those crazy, weird things where I say it's like stumbling, my way into the industry. He Anyhow, I was telling my agent about him and working together, and I said, "Yeah, this guy's becoming, he's becoming a real friend." And they were like, Jim, it's not show friends, it's show business. And you know what? They've been wrong. That agent was wrong from
Wow.
that point to now. For the rest of my life, I will say that agent was wrong. He's right in the sense that for an agent, for a lawyer, it's show business, and you
Right.
let them do the business that they get their percentage to do. But it's show friends for anyone, because this is collaborative. And the idea of working with people and having to work with people and listening to notes and not being offended by notes, and that whole process is one that it requires embracing the other person as a friend, and someone who's not an enemy to your project, but someone who's just trying to make it better.
Mhm.
And so my rule of thumb with Alex is that his idea is good and has merit, and I wouldn't be here if he wasn't also here. And so if it's going to be a true collaboration, his idea somehow has to be represented. And he said, for the most part, no one's ever treated him that way. Like,
Really?
yeah. So that seems so funny to me. Anyhow, the way we work is this. Earth X, despite maybe those first 12 sketches, was pretty much so just me writing and wrote script after script after script. And then Universe X and Paradise X became more, Alex had a bunch more ideas to move in and stuff like that. And the challenge was like then to work those ideas in and work what we were doing in Earth X. And then Justice, when we got to Justice, we started with the idea, like, let's do a really serious Super Friends. Because so much of Alex's approach to heroes began in his childhood with that first Superman movie, with Tommy, with Jesus Christ Superstar, with the Super Friends cartoons, all that kind of thing. And so it was going to that, and Alex was like, "Yeah, I want to do the Legion of Doom. I want to do their headquarters. I want to do, like, how do we do this?" And he's like, "I have a couple ideas about how Parasite and this villain could bring Superman down, and I have this idea here." So I would say Justice of what we've done is probably the most collaborative stuff, because Alex actually brought not only a big idea as far as wanting to do, let's do Super Friends, but he had a number of scenes that he had envisioned. Maybe there were 3-4 scenes especially that were vital to even plot that he envisioned. And so it started like anything. We hang out, we be friends, we geek out a little bit. We talk about favorite characters. We talked about, you know, in Justice, we talked with the book Justice, we talked about things that had happened in the DC universe that we wanted to change or we wanted to fix, or we felt like in their continuity should have gone a different way. Like, for example, the death of Aquaman's son was this classic but heartbreaking story. And we're like, no, let's have Aquaman save his son this time. You know, let's right that wrong. Let's use the Justice League characters that aren't so bound to this moment or these 5 years of continuity as to what's happening in the DC universe today. Let's grab the Justice League that people know the world over, that people remember from the cartoon, that people know from the movies. There weren't many movies then, but let's make this a Justice League, the one that the world knows, if only in pop culture and in t-shirts and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and Justice has impacted a lot. Like I've noticed even a lot of what you guys created in that book is referenced now. Like I'll see it pop up in the DC animated universe. You know, stuff that they kind of and other things. And you know, do you enjoy that? Do you now, having excuse me, collaborated with him and worked on so many different things? Like you mentioned the Logan inference. Do you enjoy seeing things that you have worked on and things that you've created now kind of pop up in the zeitgeist on occasion?
Oh yeah, that's really fun.
See other artists' take on your take, the way you were attempting to do a take on something Alan Moore or something did. Now they're doing a take on what you and Alex Ross have done.
Yeah, I think it's really fun, and it's really an honor, and it's, sometimes I think like all religion is people attaching themselves to a bigger story and becoming part of that story. And so this is very much like that. It's very much why, like, when you go to a Comic-Con, there's so much cosplay. There's so many people wanting to talk about things. It's like even the binging versus having to wait a week to watch the next chapter. It's like we live our lives while discussing stories with each other, while being attached to other stories for meaning, So yeah, I love it. I love being maybe a punctuation or a run-on sentence in the giant lore of Justice League and Marvel continuity.
That's great. I like that. Let's nerd out a little bit on the process of writing itself.
Yeah, please.
And let's talk about plot versus character. And I put and hear me, I put the verses in there not to say that you have to go one or the other. But I would like to know from you, in the overall conversation of plot versus character, where do you where would you side, kind of as you start to write? Do you spend a lot of time on the characters' choices and the dilemma and the conflicts that come between them interacting, and oftentimes the plot kind of gets birthed out of that, or maybe the other way around? You come up with a idea for a plot, and then you maybe want to stick the characters in there and see how they operate. And I'm just curious what your creative process is in developing plot and character.
It's kind of different for every project. Because I started out as just this dumb kid who could write puns. Sometimes I just start out with a piece of dialogue that I'm like, oh, that's a great piece of dialogue. And I'll write it all around that piece of dialogue. Or I'll think of the ending that I wished had happened for a bad movie, and then I'll rewrite the rest of the movie so I can have that ending. Or like my first major comic book project before I even got into film was this thing called Foot Soldiers. And that came out of reading Alan Moore's introduction to Dark Knight Returns, where he talked about characters don't become legendary. They don't really become a legend until you find out how they die. And so that led me to being like, okay, well, I'm going to tell a story about some kids that go to the graveyard of forgotten superheroes and they rob the graves, and that's how they get their powers. They try to fill the actual shoes of the original heroes. There's the pun sneaking in, and then they find out how hard it is to fill those shoes as they face the oppressive robot things that control the streets. And so it's like all of that. I think when I started doing this, I started with dialogue and plot. That's where I started. But I just feel like, the choice a character makes is plot. It's
break that down for those, for my writers who are listening here. What do you mean by that?
The decision a character makes is plot. Like the break from Act 1 to Act 2 is usually a character going on a quest. It's usually them saying, I refuse to live in the world the way it's been. I refuse to stay in the world it's been. I refuse to even just remain the person I've been. I'm going to do this thing that has to be done. I almost have no choice, even though they're making a choice. It's like either choose to remain the way you are or choose to change something. So the break from Act 1 to Act 2 is always choosing to change something. And that is the plot. That's your instigation of plot, and then it's building around that. So it's like, and character shows the change in story. We see their character in Act 1. We see a person's character in the first 10, 12 pages of the story. We see Luke Skywalker, a frustrated farm boy who's never going to get off the ground, in those first 12 minutes, that first act, versus him ultimately at the end destroying the Death Star. He can't get off a planet, and then at the end he blows up one, or he blows up the planet blower upper. It's like the two, you almost can't separate them, but sometimes plot is more important. Like if it's a mystery, maybe, but you can't get away with not showing character too. And so I think the growth of the writer is, I think we tend to either start being plot people or character people. But as time goes on, we have to embrace the other as well.
Yeah.
Like it's part of the growth. Like in the end, we can't be one or the other. We have to be both.
Yeah.
No matter on which side we start.
And I think television, the proliferation of television and streaming really forces people who are maybe plot heavy to really learn character better, because that's the world of, television is all about following that character every single week. So you have,
and it allows you that extra time. It allows you so much extra time. I mean, I can imagine, we plotters, being like, oh, I've only got 110 pages to tell this story, and this has to happen, this has to happen, and this has to happen. Character might show up in a couple pieces of dialogue, but all this stuff has to happen. But in TV, you can let that breathe a lot more.
I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about ideas. I mean, one of my
Yeah.
favorite Jim Krueger quotes is, I I rise up and of course I'm butchering the quote, but I remember you saying, I rise up and destroy entire civilizations before I have my breakfast every day. And just with because you're always thinking of ideas, you're always thinking of characters. There's like so many things kind of flowing through your head of stories. And um so what I wanted to ask you specifically is, I think there's a lot of people who will be listening to this and they would say, well, I can create a lot of ideas too, right? Like I'm very generative with my ideas. Um, but as you and I both know, ideas are not the same as stories, right? Like
Totally.
anyone can have an idea. And so my question to you is, as someone who spends so much time creating, how do you know which ideas to pursue? In other words, if you are generating, if you are so highly generative with ideas, how do you know which ones are the ones that you actually want to spend your time developing into stories? How do you know when to set aside one idea to pursue another one?
Sometimes if it's like I'll just write down an idea because I think, oh, that's funny, or oh, that's a good joke, or oh, I get how that would work, but it doesn't come back to me until I'm going through my notebook later. But if there's an idea I can't forget, where I'm like, oh yeah, that's a big story, and then other experiences in my life are making me remember that again. Almost, it's almost zen. It's almost like different things trigger me back to going to that idea, or I'll be working on one thing and it reminds me of that idea, or someone will say something, or I'll see something in the news and it reminds me of that idea, or I know that in my life, um, there's a sense in my creativity that's very Frankensteinian, Frankenstonian.
No, I believe it's Frankenstein. No, sorry, just kidding.
No, I was hoping you would take it there. I was trying to Frankensteinian, but regardless, it's like taking things that you wouldn't think belong together and stitching them together to create something new. This is why even when I was at Marvel, one of my claims to shame, I guess, is the creation of Combo Man, which was combo snacks, which took like a different slice of all these superheroes and made a really bad looking costume. And it turned into such a giant campaign for combo brand snacks. Like they had comic books. I have a basketball with Combo Man on the side of it. I have a jacket with Combo Man on the back of it. There were Combo Man calling cards in the day, like all this Combo Man stuff. And I'm like, please, God, let my biggest success not be Combo Man. I feared that for a long time.
That's funny.
Um, but so if things piggyback, like if it becomes like organic to me, where I can't put it to the side, then I'm like, okay, I need to work on this. But it's not only that, it's like, you know, it's also this idea of what makes me angry in the world.
Mm,
Like if an idea or a story I'm writing speaks to something I'm angered at in the world, it becomes medicinal for like my soul to, at least in a made up world, to figure out a way to fix that thing. And I know we've talked many times, and even with Act One, I do a whole class on the power of no, but the things I I socially and in my gut want to say no to become the things that I'm most passionate about writing about. And writers right wrongs, um, or they at least show the world a way to fix it, and hopefully inspire change in that way,
mm.
or inspire passions in that way. But there's definitely a thing that if I hate something, I love to write about it.
That's really good, Jim. I don't think you hear that angle discussed enough, right? It's always like, what are you passionate about? What are you interested in? What do you love? Right? Write what you love, write what you know, but
Fix
write
a
what you
problem. like
But
fix a problem.
Yeah, write what you hate is interesting because you're actually trying to fix a problem that inevitably other people have that same problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and the bigger the problem, the more the bigger your audience is. I mean, it's not just being held at gunpoint that time when I was in high school. I had really severe walking pneumonia, and almost died. And there have been other moments in which death has been, I've been close to death in my life. And so a lot of my stuff even includes how we respond to death. And how, like, death is not the worst scenario. If you're going to die a coward, that's a bad story. So it's like bravery in the shadow of death, which is a big courage thing, is probably why I'm a fit for the movies I get to work on and the comics I get to do, because that's one of those things that fits me. And when I think about my upbringing and how cloistered it was, and I think about my mom and dad, I think, like, there's so much there that says I was raised to be somewhat cowardly in the way I move through life. And that's why all these things and all these events have kind of helped shape the desire not to be that. So ultimately, when we write, we're writing our passions, regardless of the situation. We're writing our story over and over again, or writing the things that have triggered us over and over again. And that's how we get passionate, and that's how we choose between one idea and another.
That's good. What, in your experience, you and I have talked about this a lot in the past, about the struggles that maybe young emerging writers have in certain aspects. What is something that what's like a solid piece of writing advice is kind of your go-to writing advice for an emerging writer? What would you say that you would like for them to focus on, to work on, to emphasize?
I would say, don't be afraid of notes. Don't be afraid of getting notes. And this goes back to that rule of show friends. It's like the person giving you notes. It's their job to give you notes. It's their job to tell you when something in your script doesn't work. And if you've built a relationship with them in which you can have a conversation and go back and forth, you can always say, well, if I change that thing there to what you're suggesting, that'll change this other thing earlier on, which you really liked. So can we talk about other ways we can change this? Because clearly you see there's a problem there, and I didn't even see it. Thank you for that. Can we talk about this and maybe come up with something between us? Like, we have to be open to notes. And like, I've worked with so many writers who are so like they'll have me read their script, and my response will be like, well, this doesn't work here. And they're like, oh, well, you just don't understand what I was trying to do, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, it's not on the page. I don't need to hear your excuses. And I understand this is your passion. And I understand because what happens is, we as writers at that point, we so want to like this is us. We're putting ourselves out there. So the rejection of that thing in the script seems like a rejection of us. And it's not. It's just, oh, the math doesn't work. So can we subtract here instead of putting a plus sign? Can we do this instead of this? And if we're able to separate ourselves enough from the work and ourselves, we don't have to be hurt when there's a note.
Yeah. It's like you forgot to carry the one. Don't take it. You forgot to carry the one, so the math is off. You're not going to be offended when you realize you forgot to carry the one, and that's why your math is off. But what if I don't have a Jim Krueger in my life? Okay, I'm going to push back with you on this a little bit. Okay. I hear you. I think what you're saying is important. But what if I'm in Sheboygan at the fishing tournament?
Right.
Who do I go to for notes? Where do I go to?
Oh yeah.
To get that kind of input and advice that would actually help me?
Well, I mean, there are certainly writers groups you can do. There's certainly online stuff you can do. There's certainly people that you have friends and, um, there are probably two types of mothers out there. There's the ones that will tell you everything that's wrong and they're not helpful. And they're the ones that will tell you that everything is right and beautiful and they're not helpful. Um, here's here's how I like draw the difference between a good note and a bad note. A good note, well, I'll give you a bad note first because that's easier to explain. A bad note is when someone tells you, "Oh, well, I think you should do this," and they tell you what the story is that they would write if they were a writer, like which would change your whole story. It would change your act one, your act two. It would change the character. It would change the plot, and they're just telling you what they would do, which is a bad note. A good note is one that comes from someone who's paying attention to your story and helps you be truer to your character than you were even being. Helps you see that, oh, wait, this is who I'm writing about. This is who they need to be at this point. Someone who invests themselves into your story to help your story become great, as opposed to just, them telling you what they would do if it was their story.
One of the things that you and I have talked about over the years is, and you do a great kind of class and lecture on the idea of pitching your testimony, and you talk about the power of telling your story. And you've even said here on this podcast today about oftentimes creating your stories is being able to basically tell your story over and over again in some way. And you have a really fascinating life that you've lived, Jim, and there's been some pain and there's been some hardship. And I wonder if we could close out our podcast with you telling our audience here just a little bit about your story and some of the stuff in your past that has really kind of helped fuel and shape who you are today.
Well, and I mentioned kind of this perfect, cloistered childhood of pizza and Disney and, tow jobs, picking up cars with my dad, that I would get comic books for doing the job. But then, I mentioned that I was still in, a bad marriage with with death at my door and stuff like that. And for every lucky moment, like meeting an executive producer in a bus headed to Montclair, I got to lecture at the White House one day, too, like crazy, lucky things. But then, there's also a night in prison. There's also, difficulties and selling comic books just to make rent. And okay, so I should mention that my birthday is February 15th. That's not me, as we're a month away from that, trying to get gifts, but it's important for.
It's fine. I'll send you some chocolate. Okay, just relax.
Ew, not chocolate. This is California. I have to LA, man.
Chocolate covered strawberries. What do you want?
I don't want anything. But on February 14th, Valentine's Day, I was given divorce papers from my soon-to-be ex, the same one who, I guess, God wasn't answering her prayer that I would die in a car accident. And so she was very disappointed. God, how could you do this to me? How could you not answer my prayer? Oh, okay, God, I'll divorce him. That scenario.
If you're not going to kill him, God, I suppose
because I love you. You know how obedient I am. I'll divorce him. Anyhow, I'm given these papers. This is Wisconsin. I still have an apartment in New York or New Jersey, so I'm just like, I'm gonna get out of Wisconsin. I'm just gonna go and be by myself for a while and stuff like that. So I hop in my car and I'm driving back to Jersey. I'm not really paying any attention, so I'm speeding, and I hit Ohio, and right around Wauseon, Ohio, the sirens go on and I get pulled over. And, I notice it's like 12:30 in the morning or 1 o'clock in the morning as I'm passing my license over. I'm like, oh, it's my birthday. Can you just give me a break? And there at my side are my papers for the separation or divorce or whatever it was at the time. I'm like, look, it was a bad day. I just want to get home. I just like look. And he takes the license, goes back to his car, comes back and goes, well, your license is suspended. And I was like, what? I wouldn't learn this until later, but my soon-to-be ex had gotten a parking ticket with my car that I wasn't aware of because I was trying to fix things in Wisconsin. So any notices to my mailbox I was not getting because I was just paying the basic things like rent and electricity. So I didn't even know. And in Jersey, if you don't pay your license, they suspend your, or if you don't pay your tickets, they suspend your license. Thank God they don't do that in California. Thank God.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of suspended licenses out here.
So anyhow, he's like, that's $500. That's $500 or a night in prison. And I had just given my ex like all my money. Like I just saved enough to get back to Jersey. I was like, I'll figure the rest of it there. I'm like, yeah, I don't have it, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, okay. And then it's like going to one place where I get my ticket and then it's to the penitentiary because all the, all the counties in this area of Ohio all share the same penitentiary. So, I get in there, it's my birthday, and the guys, they take my picture and they give me the bracelet, which they wouldn't let me keep after it was all over, which is really disappointing. I still have my prisoner handbook, but that's about it, and then they take me in a room to change and stuff like that. And, I guess the joke is at least I was naked in front of somebody on my birthday, but it's the full red orange jammies. And then they take me into the back and it's like that 2-tiered kind of Shawshank thing. And, the guy behind the counter opens the doors for me and he looks at me and, I just started shaving my head at this point. He's like, back again. Maybe you'll learn your lesson this time. I'm like, do I argue with him? Do I tell him I've never been here before? Do all bald guys look alike? What is this? And then he gives me this spray bottle and this paper towel and he goes, okay, go to your cell and disinfect the mattress and I'll give you your sheet and pillow for the night. And I get in there and there's like Carl's Jr. wrappers in there. It's like they're not even cleaning this place really. And there's no toilet seat. There's no it's like it's the room. But I'm by myself. So, anyone who's listening to this doesn't have to go even further as to what this evening was like, but so I take it back and I go in and then they shut the door and there's no going in and out of the door. It's like the door is shut. And so I just remember thinking, well, this is probably as bad as it's going to get. This is probably as bad as anything's ever going to get. And then the next day, sorry, I have coffee coming. The next day, it opens up at they open the cells at 6 o'clock in the morning, so I didn't even get to sleep that much. And we go out, and now I have all the guys outside of their doors for them to make sure that we're all still there. And all of a sudden I'm like the new meat that came in at night, and they're all looking at me, and all these, and I'm like, oh my God, what is this? So then I have a choice, and they bring around the foulest smelling biscuits and gravy, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even want to eat this, And meanwhile, I've called my dad to come and get me, and even on the phone, I was kind of joking about, aren't you glad I didn't do this in high school? But here I am, an adult, and you have to come and bail me out. You have to leave your heavenly realm of Milwaukee, Wisconsin to come into the hell of Ohio to pull me out of this place. And he's on his way. I'm like, okay, he'll pay the $500. I'll be on my way. And, ultimately I had a choice. I could either go back in my cell where the door shuts, and I feel like I'm a little claustrophobic anyhow, but not too bad. Like, I can discipline myself in any way. So, or I could go outside, and they had these tables that were bolted down, and there was one small TV that was there, and the TV was showing the news. And I was like, oh, I've been so stuck in my own story for these last number of months. I might as well see what else is on the news. And there were some guys playing cards, and they said, change the channel. So the person operating the doors, who's kind of the main guard in front of the main door, changed the channel to a Saved by the Bell marathon. So it's like that Twilight Zone episode where the guy's like going my way. I'm like, did I wrap my car around a pole last night? Is this purgatory? And I think since that, or that was right around the same time that I heard that Screech had moved to Port Washington, Wisconsin. So it was all this stuff going on. And then there was this one guy there. And so like every time a new actor would come on, and they were pretty, these guys playing cards would stop and start breathing heavy, looking at the screen. And I was like, oh no. And then there was this guy with this long Rip Van Winkle ZZ Top beard who was rocking back and forth saying 72 hours. They said I'd be out in 72 hours. So I was imagining that he had been fully shaved when he was first here. And there's been all this time. And I was like, Dad, where are you? I know how long it took me to drive here. Didn't you leave when I called? You should have been here already. This was just, so I start wandering the circumference of this holding area, and there was like, there were things you could read on like here are your rights as a prisoner, all that sort of thing. And I came to a box, like a small shelf of books, and I was just waiting, and so at the top of the pile of books was Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Life, which was such a popular book. Everyone was reading it, all that sort of thing, and I was like, what else am I going to do here? So I pick it up to read it, and I open, and in his introduction to his book, he writes, "It is not an accident that you are here today reading these words." And I shut the book and said, "Fuck you, Rick Warren." No writer should do that. No writer should ever pretend to understand the cosmic whatever, for the way someone would open their book. Shame on you, Rick Warren. I'll add that to the story.
Oh my goodness. Did your dad finally show up?
Yeah, my dad finally showed up. He was upset. He was angry. He didn't even like dealing with the cops and that kind of thing. He took me back to my car. I probably should have called, New Jersey to have them cover me for the rest of the way, but they didn't have to. I didn't. I just drove home, made sure I didn't speed, and kept my wits about me, and got home, and slowly from that point built my way back.
That is by far one of my favorite birthday stories of all time. Happy birthday, Jim. Happy birthday.
Yeah, I think a year later I was driving a friend to the hospital because she had terrible kidney stones. So that was a better birthday for me, at least.
Well, here's hoping that your birthday this year is not in prison, and you're not reading Purpose Driven.
well, at least one of those things is guaranteed.
Oh man, Jim, this has been fantastic. I just think the world of you, my friend, and I just appreciate all your wisdom and insight, and just your kindness. You are such a kind person, and I want people, and I'm sure that's come across in this podcast, but you are such a generous, kind person that is, you've really impacted a lot of people, and I just want to thank you for that. Thank you for who you are, and thank you for doing this podcast with me.
Awesome, Jimmy. Anytime.
Now, if it's okay, I ask if I can pray for my guests at the end of every podcast. Would you let me do that?
Yes, please.
That's right. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today, and thank you so much for my friend Jim. And I just want to pray right now for a blessing upon his life, and thank you for his friendship. Thank you for who he is, and I just pray right now that you would that you'd bless him, you'd bless his marriage, you'd bless his relationship with his family and friends, you'd bless his career. God, I pray you would. I pray that Jim would find himself in some fantastic rooms, telling great stories and entertaining people in amazing ways, whether that be through film or TV or comic book. And God, just thank you for the way you've created him and gifted him to tell stories. And just thank you for Jim. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Your promise we stand. Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Act One podcast, celebrating over 20 years as the premier training program for Christians in Hollywood. Act One is a Christian community of entertainment industry professionals who train and equip storytellers to create works of truth, goodness, and beauty. To financially support the mission of Act One, or to learn more about our programs, visit us online at actoneprogram.com.